Introduction: Alexander's Great Challenge. The ancient historian Plutarch, describing Alexander's deeds, constantly emphasized that his victories were the result not so much of luck as of his unmatched, decisive thinking and thirst for glory. Nowhere was this more evident than on October 1, 331 BC, at Gaugamela, where two forces that seemed incomparable at first glance clashed. On one side was Alexander's army, numbering about 47,000 battle-hardened Macedonians and their allies. On the other, the vast army of the Persian King of Kings, Darius III, which, according to many historians, numbered 250,000 soldiers, sometimes even more. This was not just a reflection, but a decisive moment that determined the fate of the Persian Achaemenid Empire and heralded the dawn of a new Hellenistic era. The Battle of Gaugamela was the culmination of Alexander's military campaign, which had begun years earlier. It was a clash not only between armies, but also between military philosophies. The Persian Empire relied on overwhelming numbers, gathering warriors from the borders of its subject peoples under its banners. Alexander countered this with service, discipline, and a brilliant tactical plan. His army, created and refined by his father Philip II, was one of the most perfect fighting machines of its era, where each unit, from the phalanx to the cavalry of the Getae, acted as a single well-oiled mechanism. The victory at Gaugamela went down in military history, not simply as a triumph of the smaller over the larger. It became a textbook example of ingenious tactics, iron discipline, and the unyielding will of a commander capable of crushing a numerically superior force. This reflection demonstrated that the outcome of a battle is determined not only by the number of soldiers, but also by innovative thinking, bold maneuvering, and the ability to make extraordinary decisions at the last moment. It was here, in the dusty territory of Mesopotamia, that Alexander proved that his army was not just a force, but an advancing, guiding force that changed history forever.
The march to the great battle. The decisive battle at Gaugamela was not a spontaneous clash, but the logical outcome of a carefully planned and executed campaign of conquest. Upon ascending the throne in 336 BC, Alexander the Great inherited from his father not only a powerful army, but also a great goal: to avenge the Persians for the destruction of Greece and to subjugate the great Achaemenid Empire. In the spring of 334 BC, he crossed the Hellespont and began his classic march to the east. The first steps of the Macedonian army demonstrated its superiority. In the battle on the Granicus River, Alexander completely defeated the Persian satraps, opening the way into the depths of Asia Minor. The next major test was the Battle of Issus in 333 BC, where the Macedonians faced an army led by Darius III himself. Despite the Persians' slight superiority, Alexander's brilliant tactical plan and the power of his army prevailed once again. Darius fled the battlefield, leaving his family and untold treasures in the hands of the victor. This victory was of enormous political significance, but the war was far from over. Instead of pursuing Darius, Alexander made the strategic decision to secure his rear
and deprive the Persian fleet of its base by the sea. This was followed by a grueling 7-month siege of the Phoenician city of Tyre, which was considered impregnable. Its fall was further proof of the Macedonians' tenacity and engineering talent. Alexander then captured Egypt without much resistance, where he was proclaimed pharaoh and son of Amun. Having consolidated his power on the coast, he found himself with a secure rear and was ready for a decisive strike at the heart of the Persian Empire. It was during this period that Darius III, realizing the scale of the threat, attempted to end the war through an agreement. He sent envoys to Alexander with an unprecedented offer: to cede all lands west of the Euphrates, pay a huge indemnity, and give his daughters in exchange for peace. However, the Macedonian king, emboldened by his victories, rejected this offer. His goal was not part of the empire, but the whole thing. He sought complete and unconditional domination over Asia, and the path to this goal lay through a new, even more grandiose battle.
Army size and composition, giants and masters. At dawn, before the Battle of Gaugamela, a spectacular sight unfolded. On one side, the vast sea of the Persian army stretched for many kilometers. Darius III had gathered about 250,000 soldiers under his banner. This was not just an army, but a motley conglomerate of peoples gathered from all corners of the great empire, from the Bactrians and Scythians to the Indians and Babylonians. The strike force of the powerful Persian army consisted of heavy cavalry and formidable scythed chariots designed to break through and displace the ranks of the enemy. The main part of the army consisted of foot soldiers, often poorly armed and lacking the necessary skills. Darius relied on overwhelming superiority, hoping to crush the revolutionary enemy with sheer numbers. This huge but diverse army was up against Alexander's army, which only had about 50,000 people. But it was a totally different kind of force. The Macedonian army was honed by years of training and was a deadly fighting machine. At its core was the famous Macedonian phalanx, an indestructible wall of shields and spears, bristling with long cuirasses. On the flanks, it was covered by more mobile detachments of hypaspists, elite infantry capable of operating both as part of the phalanx and independently. The heavy cavalry of the heteroi, the Friends King, consisting of Macedonian nobility and led personally by Alexander, played a decisive role in maneuver warfare. The troops were supplemented by allied Greek cavalry and volunteer auxiliary units of light infantry and archers.
Alexander's tactics, the maneuver that changed history. Faced with a vastly superior enemy whose front line stretched for miles, Alexander understood that a simple head-on collision would lead to the inevitable encirclement and destruction of his army. His genius as a commander was evident in the development of a bold and completely unorthodox plan that would nullify the Persians' main advantage, their overwhelming numbers. Instead of attacking the center of the Persian formation, Alexander made a risky decision. He deliberately lengthened and thinned out his right flank, where his elite cavalry, the Getae, were positioned, and began to shift it even further to the right, moving at an angle to the enemy front. This maneuver was brilliant in its simplicity and effectiveness. It presented Darius III with a difficult choice: either allow the Macedonians to outflank him or stretch his own line following Alexander's movement. The Persian commanders on the left flank fell for the ruse and rushed to pursue the Macedonian cavalry, thereby disrupting the integrity of their battle formation. As a result of this movement, a gap inevitably formed in the Persian line, a weak spot between the left flank and the center. This was the moment Alexander had been waiting for. Instantly assessing the situation, he turned his hetairoi around and charged into the gap that had formed. This flanking maneuver was aimed not at the ordinary soldiers, but at the very heart of the Persian army, the center, where Darius III himself sat in his luxurious chariot. This breakthrough was the turning point of the battle. It is safe to say that it was precisely Alexander's courage and innovation in developing his strategy that rendered the Persians' numerical superiority powerless. Alexander did not play by his opponent's rules. He imposed his own game on him, turning weakness, small numbers, into an advantage, maneuverability, and striking where it was least expected. This maneuver has gone down in military tactics textbooks as an example of how a brilliant plan can prevail over brute force.
The Macedonian phalanx, a war machine. While Alexander's cavalry performed its swift and decisive maneuvers, the backbone of the Macedonian army, its indestructible foundation, was the phalanx. This unique battle formation, perfected by Alexander's father, Philip II, was a veritable war machine, unparalleled in the ancient world. The phalanx consisted of heavily armed phalanx infantrymen arranged in dense, deep rows. Their main weapon was the sarissa, a huge spear reaching 5 to 7 meters in length. When the phalanx lowered its spears, an impenetrable forest of sharp points rose before the enemy, which was practically impossible to overcome. The main strength of the phalanx lay in its monolithic nature and the power of its frontal attack. Moving towards the enemy, it resembled an armored steamroller that swept away and destroyed any enemy ranks, even the most stubborn ones. Despite its formidable strength, the phalanx had a significant disadvantage: low mobility and vulnerability on the flanks and rear. Once deployed, this cumbersome formation could not quickly change direction, making it an easy target for maneuverable enemy units. That is why the phalanx never operated separately from other branches of the military. Its power was inseparable from the support of the cavalry, which covered its flanks and pursued the defeated enemy. The hypaspists, or shield-bearers, played a special role in ensuring the flexibility of the entire battle line. These elite infantrymen were armed with short spears and large shields, which made them much more mobile than the phalangites. Positioned on the flanks of the phalanx, the hypaspists served as a link between the slow-moving center and the swift cavalry. They covered the vulnerable sides of the spear wall, repelled flank attacks, and supported cavalry maneuvers, providing the entire Macedonian army with the very flexibility and coordination that became the key to its great victories.
Course of the battle. From tension to victory. The battle began with Alexander's maneuver, who led his right flank to the right along the Persian front. Darius, fearing a flanking maneuver, threw his Bactrian and Scythian cavalry against him. While a fierce battle was raging on the right flank, the Persian king threw the main force of his right wing against the left flank of the Macedonians, commanded by the experienced Parmenion. Here, the tension reached its peak. The Macedonian ranks struggled to withstand the fierce onslaught of the superior forces of the Persian heavy cavalry, and at one point the flank was on the verge of complete defeat. But it was at this critical moment that Alexander's ingenious plan came into play. The movement of the Persian cavalry, thrown in to intercept his maneuver, created a gap in the center of their battle formation. Without wasting a second, Alexander turned his hetairoi around and at the head of the striking wedge rushed into this gap, straight towards the chariot of Darius III. The breakthrough of the elite Macedonian cavalry through the ranks of the Persian king's personal guard was the turning point of the battle. Seeing Alexander rushing towards him and the death of his bodyguards, Darius could not withstand it and fled in panic. This moment decided the outcome of the great battle. A whirlwind of swords, spears, and swift cavalry attacks unfolded on the battlefield, and suddenly the king fled as if a thunderstorm had struck the Persian ranks. The news of the monarch's flight instantly spread throughout the army, causing widespread panic. The center of the Persian army, deprived of command and will to resist, faltered and ran. Following the center, the entire gigantic Persian army began to collapse. Organized resistance ceased, and what had been a battle turned into a disorderly beating and pursuit. The great army of the Achaemenids ceased to exist.
Results and consequences. The end of the Achaemenid Empire. The defeat at Gaugamela was a death sentence for the Persian Achaemenid Empire. It was not just a military failure, but a complete collapse of the state and military machine, which had irreversible consequences. The losses on the Persian side were catastrophic. Although the exact figures are disputed by historians, all sources agree that Darius III's army effectively ceased to exist as an organized force, leaving tens of thousands dead on the battlefield. The Macedonians' losses were incomparably small, once again highlighting the triumphant tactics and skills of the greater power. Darius III's flight from the battlefield immediately led to a chain reaction. One after another, the satrapies and great cities began to recognize the victor's authority. The key moment was the voluntary surrender of Babylon, one of the richest and most dignified cities of the ancient world. Alexander entered the city triumphantly, where he was greeted as a liberator. Following Babylon, other capitals of the empire fell, Susa and Persepolis, giving the Macedonians access to the centuries-old treasures of the Persian kings. The fate of Darius III himself was tragic. He fled to the eastern satrapies, trying to assemble a new army, but his authority was completely undermined. Soon he fell victim to a conspiracy of military leaders who killed him in the hope of earning the favor of the new ruler. With the death of the last king of the Achaemenid Empire, its existence came to an end. Having eliminated his main opponent, Alexander proclaimed himself King of Asia. This was not just a title, but a statement of a new counterfactual. On the ruins of Persian rule, which had lasted for more than 2 centuries, a new Hellenistic empire was born. The victory at Gaugamela did not simply lead to a change of period. It destroyed the old world order and ushered in an era that forever changed the political and cultural map of the world, spreading Greek culture to the very borders of India. The impact of these events on subsequent history proved to be enormous. Rumors and little-known facts. Like any event of this magnitude, the Battle of Gaugamela has become overgrown with legends, rumors, and interesting details
that have taken on vivid colors over time. For example, the size of the Persian army, which numbered around 250,000 or more, is still a matter of debate. Many modern historians believe these figures to be greatly exaggerated by ancient authors who sought to glorify Alexander's feat. Nevertheless, even the most modest estimates confirm the Persians' multiple superiority. One of the surprising facts is that, despite the ferocity of the battle and the critical situation on the left flank, Alexander did not lose a single one of his key commanders in this battle. This testifies not only to the high skill of the Macedonian army, but also to the luck that accompanied the conqueror. The story of the famous Persian scythed chariots, on which Darius had high hopes, deserves special attention. They were a formidable psychological weapon designed to sow panic and break through the orderly ranks of the phalanx. However, Alexander had developed effective countermeasures in advance. On his orders, the phalanx soldiers simply stepped aside as the chariots approached, forming corridors into which the speeding vehicles rushed. Passing through the formation, they became easy prey for the warriors in the rear ranks and the light infantry. Thus, one of the most formidable weapons of the Persians was neutralized by a simple but ingenious tactic. Finally, ancient authors cite illustrative facts that illustrate the reasons for the collapse of the Persian army. When Darius III fled, his charioteer, trying to turn the chariot around, began to whip the horses. To the Persian soldiers, it seemed that the charioteer was beating the king himself, and a rumor spread through the ranks: "The king is dead." It was this rumor, generated by Darius's flight, that, according to many historians, caused the uncontrollable panic that finally broke the spirit of the giant army, turning it into an uncontrollable mob.
An artistic sketch of this moment might look like this. At dawn, before the battle, the field was covered with myriads of Persian warriors, looking like a living, exciting ocean. Opposite them, frozen in perfect formation, stood the Macedonians, not a crowd, but orderly rows, like a single mechanism of steel and will, ready for life and death. This confrontation brought together two approaches to war: the Persian reliance on sheer numbers and an unshakable belief in skill, discipline, and tactical perfection.